Hello, Texas, and welcome to a candid conversation about what powers modern life. If you're looking for facts about our energy landscape and how oil and natural gas provides energy security for our state, nation, and allies around the globe, you've come to the right place. This is TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight. Welcome back to TXOGA Talks, a podcast brought to you by TXOGA, which of course is the Texas Oil and Gas Association. Our goal of TXOGA Talks is to deliver a candid conversation about modern day oil and natural gas, the role that it plays in our lives, and how it makes our lives better. I'm Todd Staples, your host, and I'm fortunate to serve as president of TXOGA. Now, we're kicking off this new year of 2026 with what I consider to be really exciting news: the release of our 2025 Energy and Economic Impact Report. Our EEIR is an annual fact-based assessment of the economic impact of jobs, of production, local and state taxes, and state royalties paid by the operators of oil and natural gas in the prior year. So in essence, it paints a picture of the remarkable role of oil and natural gas and how it just really undergirds the Texas economy. I'm excited that we have a dynamic team who puts this report together. But with me today is the primary author and compiler of the facts of this year's report, Dr. Dean Foreman. Dean has a background in mathematics and economics. He received his PhD in economics from the University of Florida. Dean is joining me today, and he's probably glad we're talking about the economic impact report rather than University of Florida football, is my guess, Dean. Hate to bring that up at the beginning of the new year, but we're glad you're with us all the same. Okay, well, good. Well, as an Aggie, it was a good year, but it ended pitifully, so I hadn't gotten over it yet. But all that aside, I'm excited about the future, and I'm excited about this new year. Now, folks, this is our first podcast of 2026. Some of you may be new to TXOGA Talks. Let me give you just a really quick overview about our trade association. TXOGA is a statewide trade association. We represent every facet of the Texas oil and gas industry. Our members include small independents and major producers. Our members are responsible for producing over 90% of the state's crude oil and natural gas. They operate a vast majority of our state's refineries, our pipelines, our dynamic LNG export facilities, as well as include many of our state's leading service companies. This broad and diverse membership gives us a unique perspective on this industry that delivers an amazing amount. I mean, if you think about it, if Texas were its own country, we'd be the fourth largest oil producing country in the world, and that's because we produce about 43% of the nation's crude oil and 30% of the nation's natural gas. Our mission at TXOGA is to promote a robust oil and natural gas industry and to advocate for sound science-based policies and free market principles. So TXOGA has been issuing an annual report, Dean, since about 2007. It was started by someone you've gotten to know and that I've known for a long time, James LeBall, a consultant for TXOGA. James once served as the Chief Revenue Officer for the Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts. James had the nerve to retire before I did, but we certainly appreciate his long service. And so, Dean, as you've been digging into these facts and figures now here for a few years in Texas directly, and I know you've looked at Texas, you've worked here before, you've been involved, you've obviously been on top of Texas, and thinking about a report like our annual Energy and Economic Impact Report, tell us a little bit about what it takes to put something like this together.
It's a months-long process, and it's really comprehensive in the way we go down and build it from the ground up. So we're looking at sources like the Census Bureau for jobs and wages, Texas Workforce Commission, Bureau of Economic Analysis on GDP, and then for industry data and production in particular, the Railroad Commission, Energy Information Administration, plus some of our own analysis. So it's really comprehensive, and we've got a lot that we have to wrangle to get this together.
Well, we appreciate the rigor in which you approach this and the really transparency and accountability, because I know as we've looked at this report together, everything can be backed up and it's science-based and fact-based, and I appreciate that, and I'm certain that our listeners do as well. Folks, this is an amazing story. The Texas oil and natural gas industry continues to deliver. Even, Dean, during a year that's dominated by market challenges, I must say that I am very proud that oil and natural gas has demonstrated once again to be the power behind Texas progress. And I can tell you, folks, after 20 plus years serving in public office and now 11 short years here at TXOGA, I can attest that lasting progress is built on performance, not opinion. And we're talking about performance numbers here, Dean. I wish our producer Ziggy could give us a drum roll right now because we want to announce. There you go, a little impromptu for us. But we've got a big number, and I want us to think about that big number right here in this report, Dean. What's the big number that Texas Oil and Gas contributed this last year?
$27 billion. That's almost $74 million per day. It's the second highest total on record. And cumulatively since 2007, over $284 billion. Tremendous contributions across taxes, royalties, a lot of local impact there.
Now that's $27 billion, folks, from state and local taxes and state royalties alone. And I might want to get into a little bit what that includes and what it doesn't include a little bit later. But just for our listeners, I mean, you know, you hear $1 billion here to $1 billion there. Just how big is $27 billion compared to other states?
So $27 billion, if we look at Census Bureau data, that exceeds the total revenues of 34 states. That's consequential both on a state and a nationwide basis.
Folks, that's 34 states that would love to trade places with Texas, I guarantee you, because as a former policymaker, meeting the needs of a growing state is very difficult. Oil and gas is there making a difference. And when you think about this $27 billion, Dean, how does this figure really impact the state's fiscal health as compared to other industrial sectors?
We're number one in terms of the burden that we're bearing. And if we compare to the rest of the private sector on average, that tax burden is 7.5 times greater than the average of the rest of the private sector. So it's tremendous. It's a big disparity.
Okay, well, let's look at that. What do we really mean when you say 7.5 times more in tax-like revenue per employee than any other private sector? Why is that significant?
Well, it's significant because public services don't pay for themselves. So whether it's schools, roads, bridges, emergency services, this is what funds it. And as one industry shoulders this burden and goes through the economy, that takes the burden of taxes off from other places. So it really is, it's a huge contribution, but it really kickstarts the entire process.
So I guess an analogy on a way to look at that is, folks, if you could get 1% interest on your money, or you could get 7.5% interest on your money, what would you choose? And so what we're saying here is that oil and natural gas gives you that higher rate of return for every employee that we bring into Texas. And so let's, for instance, if another type of industry comes in, they may be bringing something higher than one, obviously, in contributions on taxes per employee. But since taxes fund these other services, that's why it's so important that we're delivering at a high level. We're punching way above our weight class. We're contributing much more than what we're receiving in terms of being here in Texas. I think that's very significant, and I hope it certainly resonates with our listeners today. So when we say state and local taxes and state royalties, let's break down, Dean, just where does this $27 billion go? How is it divided up in terms of how it's raised?
Well, let's highlight some key parts. Local communities see a direct contribution.
Yeah, which is huge because those local communities have local traffic, local roads, those kinds of things.
So we call them ISDs in Texas,
Yep.
but independent school districts are
Right.
collecting $2.67 billion this last fiscal year.
And are those, that's in property taxes
taxes.
only, right?
And honestly, only part of the property taxes, because there can be office buildings and other things that aren't included in the infrastructure that's oil and gas that is explicitly measured by the Texas Comptroller's Office.
And that's not included. Why?
You really can't directly attribute it back to oil and gas. And for precision and honesty, we try not to, when it's clouded, to do that.
So, okay, schools get $2.67 billion in property taxes. Since that tax rate is usually higher than what the county tax rate is, my guess is the county tax rate is a little less, but still meaningful. What did counties get out of that amount?
Fully $1 billion. So, and now we're up to 3.67.
Wow, that's a lot of money, folks, going back in the local community. And my guess is that in some of these communities, oil and natural gas could pay 60, 70, even 80+% of the entire budget for some of these communities in which oil and gas operates, is my guess.
They do, and the tables that we'll put on the website will show actually those contributions by county and by independent school district. In addition to those local contributions, we also have contributions at the state level, the Public University Fund, Permanent School Fund.
I'm glad you brought those up. The Permanent School Fund, the PSF, what we call it, is the endowment that is managed by the state's land commissioner, Commissioner Don Buckingham, and the legislature appropriates revenues from the result of that endowment to our public schools. And then the PUF, the Public University Fund, is divided between Texas A&M and the University of Texas, and those dollars go to those boards of regents, and they utilize those funds. How much money are we talking about to the PSF and to the PUF?
So for the PSF, 1.4 billion, and to the PUF, 1.7 billion. So big numbers.
Those are big numbers. Now, these are endowments essentially. The taxpayers of Texas voted to create these constitutionally created endowments. How big are these endowments today?
So the recent market value combined is over $100 billion.
Wow.
And let's put this in context.
Okay.
So the Permanent School Fund at $66.5 billion, that's number one in education endowment in the entire nation. It exceeds Harvard's endowment. And then the PUF, $40 billion. That would rank number 3 or 4. And among public universities, it would be number 1.
Folks, when we say everything's bigger in Texas, it ain't bragging if it's true. And these are real numbers that are making people's lives better. And it's certainly exciting to think about the impact. But not only are we impacting and improving the lives of Texas public school children, not only are we funding county governments, not only are we funding the Permanent University Fund and the Permanent School Fund, we also have something that a lot of Texans may not recognize, but it's the Rainy Day Fund. The Rainy Day Fund was actually another constitutionally dedicated account that was adopted by the voters, and revenues above a certain year that are paid in from production taxes goes to fund that. Tell us a little bit about the Rainy Day Fund, Dean.
So the Economic Stabilization Fund, as the comptroller refers to it, or Rainy Day Fund, and the State Highway Fund also.
Oh,
so
right.
road
Yeah,
infrastructure.
both of those.
Each of those collected $2.7 billion from production taxes this last year.
Both received $2.7 billion. The Rainy Day Fund, or as you correctly discussed it, the Economic Stabilization Fund, as well as our State Highway Fund, $2.7 billion. Now, folks, you might have noticed a lot of highway construction around Texas. The legislature put a constitutional amendment before the voters to divert some of the money that was going into the Rainy Day Fund to the Highway Fund so that they could use that to build roads. And that's the reason you're seeing some of these new highways that are fully funded by tax dollars rather than being toll roads. It's because of oil and gas is contributing and into those funds. These are very, very important dollars. So, Dean, we've been talking about a lot of big numbers here today. And, you know, some may think, well, an investment was made and then taxes were paid. There's billions of dollars in investments that are made, but this all works because of a highly trained and skilled workforce. So tell us a little bit about the workforce that goes into developing all these amazing numbers that are driving the economy of Texas.
Absolutely right. Over 495,000 jobs across the value chain directly employed by the oil and natural gas industry. And the wages that go with that, we're talking an average wage, including from the best of the engineers all the way through retail sales of gasoline. The average wage across the industry is over $133,000 per year.
That's higher than the normal average of jobs in Texas, right?
That is 68% higher than the private sector average across the rest of the private sector economy for Texas.
So we've got almost 500,000 Texans in a direct job from oil and natural gas, and they're paid extremely well. And that's what generates all the activity in Texas. But there's also other jobs.
Absolutely.
And tell us about the other jobs that are associated with these direct jobs.
So as you conduct activities, you've got indirect activity that occurs as a result of that, whether it's services that you contract for, things that are bought. And then there's also what's called induced activities. So individual consumers and households at the end of the day that re-spend that money that they earn. So if we include the indirect and induced, a conservative estimate is 1.4 million jobs supported across the economy. And we can put a range around that, but it's 1.4 to 2 million jobs that are supported by this industry right now.
Now, these other jobs, would they exist or if the oil and gas industry went away?
No, they would not exist. They would have never been created.
I think that's a very important fact to recognize, that 1.4 to 2 million jobs would disappear overnight if we didn't have the oil and gas industry in Texas. That's amazing. What a huge impact on our state's economy. What a huge impact on the lives of those individual families that are benefiting from this. I know a lot of people are getting sent to college, and a lot of other good opportunities. Homes are being built, cars are being purchased, so fishing boats are being bought. A lot of good fun things. So, Dean, let's think about just how big this impact is to our state's economy. Texas is the 8th largest economy in the world. So if you look at just how big of an impact does this activity have, this 27 billion plus the jobs that are created, and the other taxes are paid, what does that mean to our state's economy?
It means that we're supporting about $779 billion worth of annual activity right now. This is huge. And it really is built from the ground up of looking at 20 individual sectors across the economy and how they're performing: jobs, wages, gross state product, or GDP for the state.
So if we looked at the private sector gross state product of Texas, and $779 billion, folks, billion with a B, that's approaching $1 trillion. How big a percentage is that of the Texas private sector GSP, or gross state product?
It is 31% of the private sector.
So I'm pushing 1/3
Pushing,
of,
yes.
of the entire Texas private sector GSP. That's phenomenal. So, Dean, we've discussed this $27 billion that's paid in state and local taxes and state royalties. So we know what's included, but we also know the industry pays a lot of other things that are not captured in that $27 billion figure. What are some of those items that are big ticket items that are just not included that industry does pay?
Well, there's a lot of property tax on office buildings. There's rolling stock, everything that goes with inventories, office buildings in general. Where it's for shared use,
Yep.
where you can't directly, tabulate or identify
And
exactly.
it's just too much of an exercise to try to parse all that out when you have so many different companies in Texas. What about royalties that are paid to Texas royalty owners, Texas families, and others that own Texas royalties? Is that included in that 27 billion?
No, individual families that are getting royalties, they're certainly benefiting from mineral developments, on their land, but that's not something we can easily measure here.
And so how much is paid to Texas employees that work in this industry, the 500,000 Texans that we discussed?
It's over $65 billion.
So we pay 27 billion in state and local taxes and state royalties. Then you add on top of that another $66 billion that's in payroll. And then you add on that items we can't really put a number on. This turns into a really big number, a lot of jobs, and good things for Texas. Dean Foreman is who you're listening to today, the chief economist at the Texas Oil and Gas Association. Dean, we're going to take a quick break, hear from today's sponsor, and when we come back, I want to talk just a little bit more how Texas Oil and Gas is making Texas stronger and better and cleaner every day.
Hi, I'm Neil Carlton, president of the TXOGA Insurance Agency. The TXOGA Insurance Agency is pleased to sponsor today's episode of the TXOGA Talks podcast. TXOGA members have access to the TXOGA Safety Group with Texas Mutual and get a premium discount of 12.4%, as well as the possibility to earn 2 dividends. Participants also have access to unique safety tools to keep their team safe and on the job. Visit TXOGAinsurance.com for more information.
Welcome back to this episode of TXOGA Talks. I'm Todd Staples, president of the Texas Oil and Gas Association, and I'm joined in our first episode of 2026 by TXOGA chief economist, Dr. Dean Foreman. And Dr. Foreman is breaking down our annual energy and economic impact report. We're outlining the enormous and undeniable impact the Texas oil and natural gas industry has on our state's economy. The number is $27 billion that was paid in state and local taxes and state royalties in FY 2025. Dean, this is the second highest total in Texas history, which translates, as you pointed out, to nearly $74 million every day, funding our roads, our schools, our first responders. So, Dean, some may wonder, with oil prices declining in 2025, a lot of headlines about a glut and the downturn. How in the world could this number be $27 billion, only 1% less than the historic number that was announced in 2024 of 27.3 billion?
Great question. And prices are down, related taxes slightly down, but volume growth really offset this. And that's keyed by productivity. But the volumes, we just hit on all cylinders. So the entire value chain, if we hit some records, just selected ones. Crude oil production in the state, 5.85 million barrels per day, the highest ever, on a monthly basis.
Right.
Over 4.3 million barrels per day of natural gas liquids, 34.5 billion cubic feet per day of marketed natural gas. And it's not just the production, it's what we did with it through the entire value chain. So it's notable that our crude oil imports into Texas were at a record low, so under a million barrels per day for the fiscal year. And on top of that, when we look at what refiners did with it in producing fuels, refiners and petrochemicals, the uptake of NGLs through that value chain increase. So that was at a record high.
Those are amazing statistics. And those numbers were achieved, Dean, with fewer rigs than any other time in our state or nation's history. How in the world could companies be producing so much more with so many fewer rigs?
This really is the key. It's productivity. When we look at how much output of oil and gas per rig in the Permian Basin and the Eagle Ford, both had double-digit gains year on year. And this is EIA data measuring this. It's phenomenal, and it continues. We're just on the leading edge of technology affecting the sector. It looks like we have just the beginning of something to come in terms of productivity gains here.
Now, Texas certainly supports the Texas economy. We're certainly a major player when it comes to the U.S. economy. Describe for us a little bit how Texas supports global energy stability with all that's being done.
Well, you hit on two of the key numbers. Producing about 43% of crude, about 30% of natural gas. LNG exports, they've continued to ramp up. There's another 8 billion cubic feet per day of exports coming, in the next couple of years here. So huge increase in export potential, the infrastructure expansion that's supporting that. And this is important because it serves both domestic and international markets. So we just mentioned the record 34.5 billion cubic feet per day of gas production.
Mm-hmm.
We're adding, under construction right now, 22 billion cubic feet per day of pipelines, natural gas pipelines under construction. So this is huge. It really transforms the business model. It's important to everyday consumers because it's less price volatility, localized, you get more consistent prices, and it means that markets are going to work more efficiently. And frankly, as you export more gas, this is a misnomer sometimes publicly, but a lot of these projects are begetting their own supply response. So as these pipes come online, they're going to get filled up, and that gas is going to have a market. So this isn't just pie in the sky, wondering what will happen to it. It really is concrete growth building that we have good expectations for the future.
Well, and natural gas continues to be the backbone of the Texas electricity power grid, being the primary fuel source that is keeping the lights on and keeping our homes warm through directly burning gas furnaces and stoves, but also just the power generation. And Dean, there's a lot of conversation out there, but well, isn't this going to drive up prices, exporting LNG or using more for to satisfy the data centers in Texas? Where you've done some real in-depth research on that question. Remind our listeners about your conclusions there.
Thanks. The key point that you're begetting your own supply and demand response actually by expanding market access here is important. So when we look historically, and this is going back to in 2016 when we were beginning to ramp up LNG exports, what we've seen consistently year after year is that the day you flip a switch and start a project up, you might have some very short-term price response as they go to markets and start pulling it. But As the drilling programs are built up and support that, it doesn't last more than a couple of months. We just had an example of this in the last couple of months, where as we get into the onset of winter, we have record high LNG exports. We saw natural gas pop on a daily basis above $5 per million BTU. Now it's sitting at 340 per million BTU. It's way back down. So this is exactly the way markets work. It's the way you want to see the resiliency through the value chain, but it really is dynamic, and we're watching it real time, and we're watching how the price formation is changing also.
What it really means to me too is great points that you made. And if we were only trying to meet our domestic needs here, we would only have the kind of level of activity that is necessary to meet that. And if we had any draws on it, the prices would spike similarly to what they're doing now. And so the fact that we're being an energy supplier to the world, we benefit from the jobs, the economic activity that goes along with it, and consumers also benefit from the prices from just the volume of production that's occurring. I think this is great information and is certainly making a big difference in Texas and in our lives. I want to jump here, Dean, to kind of a future outlook as we wrap up here. So we know that the EPA has granted Texas primacy to administer Class 6 wells. The state has a clear path to lead in carbon capture and storage projects, which will not only make oil and natural gas more welcome to the international markets, but it will also help satisfy the needs of industrial manufacturers here at home who sell primarily to international markets. And so progress in this space, along with progress in produced water recycling and reuse through science-based collaborative partnerships like the Texas Water and Seismicity Partnership, the Produced Water Consortium at Texas Tech, TCEQ, Railroad Commission, and others, including the Center for Injection and Seismicity Research, all really makes a difference. And as I think about this, there's a vital need for continued investment in pipelines and water systems and electricity transmission to maintain this growth. Now, I say all this because the report stresses that future successes depend on a pro-infrastructure posture. Beyond pipelines, why is investment in water systems and electricity transmission so vital for the state's continued growth?
It's vital because energy development doesn't happen in isolation. So the water systems, the electricity, it's key both to being efficient, cost effective, and environmentally responsible through the value chain as we develop these things. And the steps that you just mentioned that are going forward, it keeps us on the leading edge of both where the industry is heading in the long term, and it fosters global access. We wouldn't have access to sell, for example, to Europe without making these sustainability investments.
Through CCS. Yeah, that's a great point because those buyers are expecting that, and our companies are responding to that market expectation, just like when your local retail store brings in the products that people are looking for. That's what's taking place here. So, Dean, we've given our listeners a ton of information here today, and I hope that it's been beneficial to them. But you've put together a really good-looking report, and tell them where they can go find that report and take a look themselves.
Well, report is available at TXOGA.org /2020, 2025 EEIR.
Okay, let's just repeat that. TXOGA.org /2025 EEIR.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I want to be clear, this is a really accessible, polished report. It's an easy read, but you get the key things and you get all the key figures in a pretty dense format.
It is, and it hits the highlights. It's got some really easy to use graphics that might come in handy to those that are listening today. Thanks, Dean, so much for sharing your insight with us today. I appreciate that. It's amazing about these contributions to the Texas economy, and you've captured them very succinctly.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate the ability to go through the data and talk about how Texas industry is delivering.
Well, you've done a yeoman's work in putting it together. I know it's been months and months and months in the coming, so we're excited about it. Folks, as we wrap up here today, I just want to point out the consistent performance of the oil and natural gas industry reflects Texas' long-standing commitment to reliability over rhetoric and pragmatism over politics. A fair, predictable regulatory and legal framework paired with pro-infrastructure posture has allowed innovation, investment, and responsible development to flourish. At a time when energy debates are often driven by competing narratives, The Energy and Economic Impact Report focuses on facts. It underscores a simple truth. Texas runs on oil and natural gas, made possible by hundreds of thousands of skilled men and women who rise before the sun each day to keep our economy moving and our communities secure. We look forward to continuing our partnership with state leaders and communities to keep Texas powered, prosperous, and prepared for what comes next. That's it for today. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of TXOGA Talks, where energy meets insight.
The views expressed on this podcast are not intended and should not be construed to be the views of any particular TXOGA member or company. The purpose of this podcast is to engage in candid conversations about energy needs, energy security, and the future of energy.